There are many ways to cut a hexagon. I've built a couple versions of this hexagon cutting jig in previous videos, this being my latest adjustable model that allows me to batch out hexagons any size. First, I cut some strips of cherry wood to roughly the same width as the hexagons I want to cut. I'll make a first cut to set the angle, then I can flip it over and butt it up against the stop. Then it's just a matter of rotating the piece and making the cuts until you have a perfect hexagon. The beauty of this sled is that you can quickly batch out perfectly identical hexagons, which is a really good thing since I'll need about 50 of them for this project. I'm going to pour epoxy resin around the hexagons to create a honeycomb effect. The first step is to build the mold. Now melamine is a great material for this, and I happen to have some left over from my workbench build. Now this may be overkill, but I really don't want the epoxy to bond with the mold, so I'm also going to cover the sides with tuck tape. This should make it easier to release the mold once the epoxy has cured. Once I've covered the bottom and all the sides, I'll assemble the mold with some screws. When you pour the epoxy, it's like water, which means it'll likely seep from the seams if given the chance. So here I'm caulking all the seams using a fast drying silicone. While that dries, I'll give all of my hexagons a light sanding to eliminate tear out and any fuzzies. Okay, so I was thinking of the best way to hold down each of the hexagons in place without them floating around once I pour the epoxy. I can either find a way to clamp them down, or I figure I can use some hot glue to bond them temporarily. I went with the latter and was surprised by how well the hot glue stuck to the tuck tape. I used some 1/2-inch spacers cut from plywood to evenly space them out and create the honeycomb effect. The glue dries pretty fast, so I could pull out the spacers and start working on the next row. I'm trying to make this as symmetric as possible, and so far so good. At the end of each row, I had to cut the last hexagon in half, which was easily done using the table saw sled that I used earlier. I'm using a slow setting epoxy made for deep pours because it just happens to be what I have on hand. I could have used Chill Clear, which is made for 1/2-inch pours and dries a bit faster. This one will take 3 to 5 days to cure in the mold before I can take it out. The instructions are pretty simple, just mix 2 parts A with 1 part B and mix it up for about 5 minutes. Now this epoxy will dry crystal clear, so I decided to add a little white pigment to give it a more frosted look. With the mold perfectly flat and level, it's time to pour the epoxy. So much for the dramatic effect I was going for. I ran out of epoxy, so I mixed up another batch. Okay, while that cures, I'll get to work on the serving board base. Again, I'm using cherry wood here, in case you're wondering. The base will be essentially made up of 4 sides with mitered corners and a thin floating panel at the bottom. Starting with a floating panel, I'll use my bandsaw to resaw a couple boards into thinner stock. The bandsaw leaves a rough surface, so I'll give them a quick trip through the planer. These boards are pretty thin, maybe 3/8 or so, so instead of using clamps, I decided to just use tape to glue and clamp them. Here I'm stretching out the tape before laying it down to make sure the seams are nice and tight. Now I can flip it over and apply glue to the joints. I removed the squeeze out and applied a few pieces of tape on top. That should do it. Once dried, I can remove the tape, then square it up and cut it to its final size using my crosscut sled. And of course, a little sanding to finish it off. Okay, so that's it for the panel. Next I'll build the sides of the tray. Here I'm ripping 4 pieces to size. Each piece will get a rabbet at the top that I'll make using my router table and a straight bit. With the rabbets cut, next I'll cut thin dados towards the bottom of each piece. I'll first run all of the pieces through, then nudge the fence over a tiny bit and run them all through again. I'll keep doing this until the dado is just wide enough to fit the bottom panel. Alright, so we've got our dados and our rabbets. The last step is to cut the length and assemble the 4 sides using miter joints. Clamping a miter frame is always annoying if I'm being honest, but I find that using tape helps a lot. I like to lay the pieces flat onto a piece of tape and use the bottom panel to make sure they're straight. Once all 4 pieces are taped together, I can apply glue to each joint and fold them up around the bottom panel. Again, the bottom panel is a floating panel, so I'm not applying any glue to the dados. Probably overkill, but I'll apply a little extra pressure using this strap clamp. Then wipe away any squeeze out in the corners while it's still wet and let it dry. After sanding, I'll apply a finish. Now the base of this serving board won't be in contact with food and shouldn't really need to be washed, unlike the honeycomb top. They're made as 2 separate parts with this in mind. I decided to use a simple wipe-on tongue oil to finish the base, which should really make the cherry wood pop. I'm picturing this serving tray for cheese or small bites at a dinner party, so I figure it should have some sort of handles to easily pass it around. I found these cute little T-knobs on Amazon, which are easy to install, just like dryer pulls. Okay, I'm going to put the bottom tray on hold for a bit now that my epoxy has cured. It's been in the mold for 5 days now and ready to come out. Taking the sides off is easy. Just unscrew and give it a whack with a rubber mallet. The bottom wouldn't let go so easily. I tried to get in there with a putty knife and a painter's tool, but it dawned on me that all that hot glue that I used was really making this a challenge. My only advice here would be that a little hot glue goes a long way, so don't overdo it like I did. Eventually I was able to get some wedges in there and pry it loose. Now this next part should probably come with a warning. Don't try this at home. The easiest way to level this board is run it through my planer. But I also know how hard this might be on the motor and potentially damaging to the blades. I've seen other people do it and my blades are due to be replaced, so I figured what the heck. Again, probably not something I would recommend. I was super careful running it through the planer, taking the lightest passes possible, barely lowering the cutter head by 1/8 of a turn on each pass. Even so, you can hear the motor struggle. Eventually I got one side flat and sighed a little from relief. After giving the motor a little break, I flipped it over and started on the other side. I could tell that the planer did not like this side at all and quickly figured out why. All that hot glue I used to stick down the hexagons was gumming up and creating a sticky nightmare. I pulled it off the planer and grabbed a razor blade scraper and began scraping away as much of the hot glue as I could. Sure, this took a little elbow grease, but I have no doubt that my planer thanks me for it. With this done, a few more passes in the planer without issue and both sides were finally flat. Phew! Now I made my mold a little oversized so I could trim down the board to its final size and try to make it as symmetric as possible. I started shaving it down bit by bit, side by side, until it was just right. It's looking good already, but of course I've still got a lot of sanding to do, starting with a low grit. I noticed some small voids in the epoxy. I could touch them up with more epoxy, but I don't have time to wait for it to dry, so instead I applied a few drops of CA glue, then hit it with some accelerator so it would dry almost instantly. It won't be perfect because it doesn't have the white pigment in it, but I don't think anyone would be able to notice. I kept sanding and working my way through the grits. At 220, I used some water to pop the grain, as you would with any cutting board. This will raise the grain and make it rough once it dries, but I'll just sand it again with the same grit to cut all those fibers. This way, when you wash it for the first time, it should stay relatively smooth. I sanded all the way up to 400 grit and cleaned it off before applying a few coats of butcher block oil. By the way, all the products I use in this video can be found in the video's description down below. I found these LED strip lights at Princess Auto and I've been looking for an excuse to use them. They come with a remote and run on batteries, so I can easily conceal them in the bottom tray, out of sight. At first I was just planning to run them around the four sides, but they're even longer than I expected. You can cut them, but I want to use as many lumens as I can, so I'll add a small strip of wood down the middle with some hot glue for extra surface area. These are so easy to install, just peel and stick. You can cut them to any length, just make sure to cut where it says to. Alright, I'm pretty excited to try this out. Ready? This is definitely something I'll be using at my next dinner party. I personally like the white light, but hey, have fun with it. Hey, I hope you enjoy the video, and if you're interested in the hexagon cutting jig plans, you can also grab those here. Until next time, thanks for watching, see you soon.